Luce, do you agree with that? And what we've seen today is a symbolic continuity, a sense of British nationalism, but beyond that, very little else?
I think that's about right. I mean, you must remember that the tradition of continuity with the British royal family, as I think Farouk was sort of indicating, is one of change and adaptation to changing circumstances. And so it's gone from being an absolute monarchy 400 or 500 years ago to being a purely symbolic monarchy, not quite a monarchy, not quite the bicycling bourgeois monarchies that you see in Scandinavia and the Netherlands that have really downgraded. But I suspect there's going to be a lot of pressure on Charles to downgrade some of the sort of scale of pomp and circumstance around the royal family in what is a time of quite great economic austerity in Britain, and much worse to come, by the way, this winter. So the test of whether, you know, that continuity is going to involve some change, some trimming down, I think will come with Charles's coronation next year. Will it be that this grand golden coronation you saw for his mother in 1953, or will it be a more modest Scandinavian style one? And I suspect he has preferences, and he's argued over many decades for slimming down what they call the civil list. That's the number of royals who get money from the taxpayer. He's successfully argued to shrink it, and I suspect he's going to, mindful of history, mindful of the adaptability of the institution he now heads, he's going to want to slim it down some more. As regards the Commonwealth, look, there are 14 countries left with the British monarch on its coins as its head of state. There were probably 50 when the Queen became Queen. That's also part of continuity, that people drop the British monarch as their head of state. It's a totally natural thing to do. I'm surprised there are as many as 14 countries left that still keep the British monarch. And I suspect that rate of decrease will continue quite steadily in the years ahead. It just doesn't seem normal for a country, say, the other side of the world, like Australia, or the other side of the Atlantic, like Canada, or many Caribbean, West Indian nations, to have what is a foreign head of state as your head of state. So, you know, I don't even think that will signal any great disruption. It's a totally normal thing. And if I were Australian or Jamaican or whatever, I would certainly want my own head of state.
But then how do you explain, Ed Luce, the spectacle that we've seen over the last 10 days? This grand... How do you explain the spectacle, Ed Luce? Because does that suggest an affection for Queen Elizabeth quite distinct from any special affection for the royalty?
Yes, I think it does. And look, a sort of interesting factoid occurred to me today. When she was born in 1926, so 21 years before India's independence, the world's population was 2 billion. Today, 2.5 billion watched her funeral, more than the number of people alive when she was born, and what is amongst the largest television audiences in history. This reflects, I think, affection for her, for what was a very non-flashy, non-showy, quite in her own way modest person, in spite of the sometimes absurd monarchical trappings around her, that there was an affection. And there's also, you know, we talk about nostalgia, but funerals are about looking back. And 70 years on the throne, beating Queen Victoria, beating all the Georges and all the Charleses and Edwards and all the others who've been on the English throne for 1,000 years, and beating, I think, every single other living head of state or head of nation, other than the Dalai Lama, who of course became the Dalai Lama during the Second World War, is quite an extraordinary feat. And so it marks, it's a punctuation mark in history. There is no empire left. There hasn't been for a very long time. But she was the last monarch who really came to adulthood whilst there was an empire. And so I think this closes the final sort of trappings on that era.